Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, welcome and good afternoon. Due to the special character of the event, we have a large number of reserved seats and have been overwhelmed by the enthusiasm and interest of all of you who wanted to attend. We have puzzled our brains about how to accommodate you comfortably. Even those of you who are sitting at the balcony, I hope you're okay and who have remained maybe in the entrance hall. I would like to thank Renaissance Hotel for their kind and endless support. My name is Anne Wertheim. I am director of the John Adams Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome Bill Viola and Peter Sellars here in the Koepelzaal in Amsterdam. It is a privilege for us that you have agreed to speak to us in our lecture series. The John Adams Institute organizes 10 to 12 lectures and readings per year with American men and women of arts, letters, and science. We are a non-profit institute working on a low budget and able to continue our work thanks to the assistance of many students and volunteers. The Kersjes van de Groenekan Foundation gave us a subsidy to cover 1998, for which we are very thankful. I would like to thank the Stedelijk Museum for their assistance and inspiration, especially Doreen Mignot, who drew our attention to the Bill Viola and Peter Sellars unique combination. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no intermission. Opera and theater director Peter Sellars is here with us today, together with David Ross, who was formerly director of the Whitney Museum in New York. He curated Bill Viola's exhibition that is presently on show in the Stedelijk Museum. Peter Sellars will be talking to Bill Viola today, and the afternoon will follow its own course. And Gary Schwartz, member of the board of our institute, will close the afternoon at around 4:30. Bill Viola has agreed to sign books afterwards. We didn't talk about it, but I hope you do.
What did you say?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And the floor is now to Peter Sellars and Bill Viola.
Well, let's do it. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's just comfortable here. Perfect. Great, except for the fabulous drip, of which more later. Could I just ask, right at the beginning, how many people here have gotten to see Bill's work at the Stedelijk? Oh my gosh.
Wow, that's
Wow.
pretty good.
So if we talk about some of the pieces, that's all right. I just don't want to bore anyone, because if you haven't seen it, there's nothing like, people who you just can't stand to be with who tell you about movies you haven't seen yet, and it's just, but if there's a critical mass, that's great.
I didn't put up my hand, by the way, you noticed.
I should begin just by thanking the Stedelijk for the pleasure and privilege of this space, which already brings with it its own karmic history, and which is very moving to see this work. We've only shown this exhibit in America, where, as I need not tell you, the atmosphere is slightly different. And since Bill's work is about atmosphere, in the deepest sense, one of my favorite things about Bill's work is you can't put your finger on it, literally. It is a feeling, not an object, or as the way Bill puts it, oh my God, this drip is so fabulous. Thank you.
Wait a few minutes and all the water will come.
But one of the, and the drip is really moving around, huh? and it shows the diplomatic section, I see. In any case, one of the things that Bill said a few months ago was actually in the exhibit, there's no artwork there. That is to say, at the end of the day, when the exhibit is shut, they turn the power off, and it's just a bunch of empty walls and empty rooms, and actually nothing remains. You know, whereas if you have a Rembrandt exhibit and you shut the lights off at the end of the day, like, you know, the Rembrandts are still there in the dark, glowing in their own particular way. But in this case, you turn the switch off, and there's no more art. And it doesn't have any real existence as an object. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
And
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Period of pretty intense and very aggressive materialism, where we're constantly convinced that the world is entirely things that you can buy, sell, put your fingers on, and where a kind of sense of the empirical, you know, we can count it, therefore it exists, and anything that can't be counted, we won't count. And we're in the process of creating societies on that basis. In America, we're not in the process, we've done it. How do you begin to make work in that culture, Bill, in a culture of things you can count and things you can touch, where the nature of the work you actually cannot touch, there's no object there. And it's even strange for people to collect your work, you know, because what do they get, a TV set?
No, they have a TV set.
They have one of those. They said, if only we could have a TV set.
No, they just get the tape.
Right.
Well, I think, in actual fact, it is because of video that we are now able to work with these intangible things. A room with nothing in it is still a room. A human being without breath or heartbeat is still a body. But the unique thing for me about this medium, from when I first touched it, was that edge of fragility. And when I started, it was very fragile because technically it was not like it is today. I mean, it's still evolving, but it was breaking constantly. You couldn't really control how you edited. You couldn't get clarity with a video camera up until the early 1980s, really. And so all of those things made it be this more like a cloud rather than a rock, than something solid. And I never forget one of my first experiences when I was using video. And for me, it was a great opportunity because unlike painting, where I had to struggle in art school to render all of those things, and this thing was like, you just pushed the button. You know, it had a little red light that even flashed that showed you which one to push. And you push the button and you were given these images. They just appeared complete. And in the course of learning that at the beginning, I'll never forget, I was out making a tape and I had my idea and I was all set. This is going to be, of course, when you're starting out, you think everything's going to be the greatest work in the universe. So I had this all planned, and I picked the camera up, pushed the button, recorded, put it down, walked to the next scene, found the right moment, the right scene, shot again, put the camera down. What I didn't realize what had happened was I had not paid attention and had reversed the buttons pushing, so that every time I pushed the button, I turned the camera off and put it down and walked to the next scene. So I had this amazing footage of these feet walking and the camera swinging on the ground, and then it would come up to this really beautiful image, a tree against the sky, and it would go and go off, and then it would go on again, and the swinging would start walking down the street. So you know, it's always been this this medium that wants to just move away. Human beings all have a desire to control something, to hold something. From when you're a baby, the baby reaching and grasping, it's just built within us, and this medium kind of defies that. It has its own life. It doesn't really let you do that.
It's incredible. In the history of art, every once in a while, there's a moment where there literally a new medium appears. Painting changes. Just the technology of how to paint changes, and that becomes an issue. What's phenomenal is what we have at the Stedelijk is a 25-year survey of work of a medium that did not exist 30 years ago, and that entirely has been created in our lifetime. Like right now, on the surface of the planet, there's a completely new art form that never previously existed. And already the distance between the first cameras and recorders that you had, and now a little handheld camcorder that anybody can have, has just taken place within a very short span of years. Would you say something about living with, first of all, what made you start with a technology that was not previously devoted to art, and what made you think, oh, maybe we should think of it in those terms?
Well, I first touched a video camera in 1970, and I was an art student, second year university, and at that time, 69, 1970, the late 60s, we know what was going on. There was a tremendous amount of change. There was an extraordinary energy in the air that was palpable. You could feel it. You would go to sleep and it was there, and you would wake up and it was there. It wasn't like what happened when you made time for something in your life, like going to class. Now we're learning outside of class, you do something else called relaxation or entertainment or socializing. In that time, it was continuous, and that energy was just there. And my first interest was music, really, particularly electronic music, and I was very interested in technical things in general. And I'd have to say, too, at that time, there were already models. And that's another thing that's really important, to have. You have to have some kind of object, some goal, something to show you the way. So the history of art is not really the history of innovation. It's the history of people who were following the light that came before, and maybe going in a slightly different way, or maybe in a radically different way. But there had to be some kind of light there that they were following. And so when I was, 20, when I first touched video, there was, of course, Nam June Paik, who really showed everyone the way in the medium. He had been doing it since the early 1960s, 63, 64, modifying television sets by putting magnets on them and distorting the image. I would say he probably was the first one that recognized the visual potential of the medium, that this was an untapped resource in terms of visual art. And then there was people like Peter Campus, who was doing extraordinary work coming out of experimental psychology. He was a researcher with human perception, and he actually taught me a great deal. That it's not only about the camera, this machine, but it's about the eye and the viewer behind the camera. That video as a complete medium is not the hardware, which especially we Americans, we're like hardware crazy. And so this man comes along and starts talking about what's going on this side of the camera, and how that has to be in place and has to be understood in order to be able to make a videotape. And Bruce Nauman, he showed a lot of us the way in many ways, did some extraordinary works. I'll never forget when I saw his retrospective at the Whitney Museum. I think he was probably maybe in his early 30s at the time. And it was like a group show. I was astounded that one person he was the one for me that just got rid of the idea which comes out of 19th or even 18th century scientific materialism that gave us ideas of things like zoology. When you go to the Serengeti Plain and you look at the zebras and you look at the giraffes and you look at the hyenas and you just look at them on their own, and then you do something called a zoo and you keep them all divided, as opposed to how we now approach it, according to the science of ecology, which I think is one of the great intellectual developments in the 20th century, that you go to the Serengeti now and you study the grass and the climate patterns and the vegetation and the hyenas and how they interact with the giraffes and how they interact with the zebras and how everything just all is a living system that is all connected. And so Naumann just went through the medium, because in art things were classified according to media. They were always put in different, we still in museums have Department of Painting, Department of Sculpture, and so on. And so he just traveled through media like fluidly. He'd work with anything, stone, wood, glass, holography, video, didn't matter. And he did a piece called Public Space, Private Space, which I was, 21 when I saw it, and I was astounded that someone took the most simple system imaginable. It simply was 2 rooms, side by side, for those of you who don't know the piece. One of the rooms, they're identical size, and they have identical objects in them. One room, both rooms had a monitor, a video monitor, and they each had a video camera. And the camera was on one of those little scanning motors. And the beautiful thing about the piece was that he took the camera in the room that you entered, and it was scanning you, and he sent your image into the other room. The other room was completely sealed. They built it as a box with no door. You could not enter this room. So here you are seeing on your TV monitor a camera scanning an empty room with no one in it. And every once in a while it passes a monitor in that room, and there's you on the monitor from the camera in your room scanning the room. So here was someone who took physical objects, which I had been trained in art school to respect and to understand as the key connecting thread in art history, the history of material objects, which is why museums are constructed in order to house these objects. And here was a guy who came along and took that and just threw it away, really, and made a room with nothing in it, and furthermore, used the room with nothing in it and used video technology to make a very profound philosophical statement about the human condition. It was the first time I understood that you could make philosophy with empty rooms and not with things.
So if one of the subjects of Vermeer is the entrance of light, and in your work it's not subject matter, it is the work. Light is the medium. Your work is the entrance of light. It's not about the entrance of light. What does that give you permission to do?
To turn out the lights.
I mean, could you talk a little bit about just, again, the nature of a video image as light and the relation it bears to light? Or maybe it's better to go at another way. Oh, and by the way, everyone, if people have questions or things they want to add or comment, please feel free to interrupt at any moment. I respond very well to that kind of thing. What interests me is 2 things. Is this question of entrance of light and the way that works in your life, as a fact in your life. And so if we want to talk about the entrance of light, I think one of the first elements of the entrance of light that would say, separate your work from Vermeer in a certain way, is this question of time. Is our experience of light is through time.
Right.
And your work contains time in a way that Vermeer's maybe doesn't. As I was telling you this morning, I was really thinking that, your work exists in time, but it is not a performance. It is non-performative. You know, it's
Right.
just really interesting to me. And how does... Well, maybe you talk about time and the entrance of light.
How much time do we have? Can I tell you a little Vermeer story? I think I've told it to you, but I'll say it again. There's a few friends in the room that might want to hear it too. Yeah, I went to the National Gallery in London when they had the big Vermeer show, when he achieved superstar status in the 20th century. The artistic, you know, every artist's dream of the afterlife, you know. Get on TV in, you know, the next century. Anyway, so, and all the fringe industries that are sprung up around that, Vermeer mugs and T-shirts and, you know, all the residuals and everything. So we went down there and, you know, huge line, it was freezing cold. It was incredible to see that in a country, of course, that has officially proclaimed that art is not necessary for human life, that we do not need something called a National Endowment for the Arts, that we're doing quite fine, thank you, with commercial television, yes. It's kind of astounding to still see this real groundswell from the people that, yes, this is important and this is necessary in our lives. And it was, I don't know what it is in centigrade, it was like 10 degrees below zero, and people were around two blocks to get in. It's amazing. But anyway, so I went in, it was incredibly crowded, another kind of problem that us professionals have who've had the privilege of seeing art with no one in the room. You know, everybody's sort of, sometimes I think maybe some curators would love the idea of a public-less art, you know, where we can finally see the paintings, you know. But you could not do that with Vermeer that day, and I was very frustrated and very angry, and I wanted to be one of those people alone in the room, you know. And so you go in and you sort of literally waited online. View of Delft, 20 minutes, you know, and, you know, it was amazing. And I waited online, and I got to the room where they had the three images of the women alone, and I think it was a woman holding a balance, if I'm not mistaken. And there they were, small paintings, very crowded. So I got in there, there were crowds of people around each one. I get in the back, and I'm there in the back. The first thing I see is a gray head, like filling my field of view. The man in front of me looked like a very nice man, but he had a big head. So there he was. And I had to wait. And then people in the front would gradually move out of the way, and you'd sort of move up a little. So a couple of people left, and we'd move up, and the gray head moved over here, and then there was another half of a person. But while the gray head was there, I got so angry I was going to just scream and run away. And then I just calmed myself down, and I looked up, and I saw the upper left-hand corner of the painting. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. There was light coming in, the curtain was washing on the wall, the way only Vermeer can do light coming through a translucent surface. And I just watched this golden light for a while until the gray head moved out of the way. And as I moved up towards the painting, it was reframed for me by bodies, by different people. So I'd see then the right-hand side, then I'd see the lower corner of the painting, and then finally, the last people step away, and there you are in front of the painting. Now, what happened was, I realized with this was that in fact, that was closer to the reality of Vermeer, the maker of that work, than it was to what I thought the work was. Because he worked on that upper left-hand corner of that painting a hell of a lot longer than it took me to stand there waiting for the guy to move out of the way. And he worked on the lower right-hand corner, you know? It was like these things they're not photography. It's not a static image that you're given immediately. They were constructed over time. So there's this kind of time sense in that.
Well, I'm of course, one of my obsessions is when I was younger, I made this rule that you should spend as much time in front of a work of art as the person who made it. and really, and there was a time in my life where I really did that.
Really?
And I was pretty. I was really obsessed with length, and in Japan, which one of the reasons both of us went to Japan at a certain moment in our lives
Right.
was actually to touch the No drama, which takes place a no play, if you look at it on the page, it's about 5 pages long, and the performance lasts about 2 hours. And at this very slow pace, and in fact, a day of no plays begins at about 9 in the morning and then goes till dusk, and you watch an entire day. It's outdoors in a sacred site, and you watch the sun move through the sky, birds come and go, deer come and go, little crabs scurry around, and the performance continues. And after a while, you begin to realize that it's not slow. It's actually going at the pace of nature. That the performance is about getting human beings to metabolically slow down and rejoin the pace at which the world around them is actually moving. Or to paraphrase, I did that concert with the Dagar brothers.
Right.
These great Indian Drupad singers in Drupad, is that earliest Indian pre-Vedantic chant, which a single tone is sustained for like a half hour. And this great master, Dagar, when I met him, he said, "Oh yes, I've just come from spending 3 weeks in Los Angeles." And I thought, well, here he's practicing this art form, which is about this sustained meditative tone. And I said, how can you do that in a city, in American culture where everything's on fast forward, everything's moving so quickly all the time? Wasn't it a little, strange to practice this art form that moves so slowly? And he said, no. He said, the world is always slow. It's only your mind that is fast. Actually, oh my God. If you begin to just observe the pace of the planet, it's moving differently. And when you begin to open your life up to that possibility of that experience, you begin noticing things that you wouldn't notice when you were in a rush. For example, in the Japanese no play, I remember the third play of the day in the middle of the afternoon at Itsukushima Shrine by Miyajima opposite Hiroshima on the bay, on the water. Oh, yeah. So the stage is out in the middle of the water, and the tide is literally starts in, and there's water between you and the performers. And the performers in Japanese no have these gigantic costumes with all of this gold fabric all over them, with gold embroidery. And of course, what you don't realize when you see it in a museum is it's meant to take light. What it does is the sunlight hits the water and reflects back onto the costumes. And so, because in No, all of the characters are spiritual beings, usually ghosts of, I'm sorry, Bill, but I'm just going to talk about No plays for a little bit.
Go for it, Peter.
Every No play is in the same structure. This actually connects to Bill's work.
It does.
Every No play is in the same structure. Usually, the beginning of the play, a wandering priest, a kind of itinerant, someone on a pilgrimage, is wandering, traveling, arrives at a certain location that is the site, for example, where a certain great warrior was killed. And he feels the presence of this at this place. That a place inherently has some kind of meaning. And there's a character who's like an old gardener raking leaves, who tells him the story of what happened here once. That's the first part of the play. Then there's a comic interlude, and the wandering priest begins to meditate. And then in the second half of the play, that gardener returns as the actual incarnation of the spirit of this warrior. and in fact reenacts the death that took place, because the spirit of that warrior has been hovering here for 7 centuries and is incarnated in this man raking leaves. And the spirit of what happened here will always be here. And the ghost, the spiritual presence, is always there. And a play like that, called Tamoe, where the main character is associated with the kind of bird of prey. In the second half of the play, as the that's why the lighting is so beautiful, is because you get that these are spiritual entities, because the sunlight on the water is making this incredible place. Someone's standing there, and this fantastic sense of dematerialization is going on in the sunlight, and this Buddhist image of ephemeral existence, and that in fact everything is a brief play of light on water, you know, and that is what this material world is, and it will vanish as quickly, and you can't hold on to it, and you're dazzled by it, but it's brief. And at the moment the figure re-entered as a ghost from the side and lifted this sleeve, this huge sleeve, a hawk flew over the stage, through the sun, and the shadow of the hawk passed across the sleeve. Which you couldn't plan. And it's what you said, when you turn the video camera on, you're actually given an image and it is a gift.
Right.
But everything was about the preparation that it took to get there, so that things could align themselves in such a way, and you were in such an alignment that A, it would happen, and B, you would notice it. Would you talk about the preparation to turn the camera on?
Well, step 1. Make sure your batteries are charged.
And then talk about this metabolic thing, because...
Well, I want to talk about the time thing.
Oh, cool.
That's what... There's a lot there, about that. And it is related to that window you're given. When you turn on a camera, you're given a window. You're opening a window, I should say. You're given an image, light and sound, but you're opening a window. And the first thing you realize is not what you've been taught, that you turn the camera on to get something, to bring the world in, and then by extension in the medium thinking of television as the window to the world and all that stuff. You're really realizing that you're actually only taking part of something that's much larger. So in actual fact, when you're turning the camera on, what you're doing is you're choosing not to get everything else, which you can never get. And so it's like Henri Bergson's notion of the human senses as not being windows but being limiters to the total amount of information that exists in the universe, which, if you were able to truly receive that information, and speaking scientifically, consider that the range of human sight in terms of wavelengths of light and the range of human hearing in terms of vibrations per second of sound is actually vastly smaller than the entire electromagnetic spectrum and the entire spectrum of vibration in the universe. So we're actually just looking through these little slits in the wall, barely. And if you were to take away the wall, you would just be annihilated. You'd be overwhelmed. And that is, of course, in spiritual practice and religious practice, that is the goal, to reach that state. And I was really fascinated in Islam. the color scheme includes black as a color. Black is the highest color. And we know here in the West, our color system describes the idea of light as white is the pure light of all the colors. And then those colors sort of get combining, create white, but then they can get divided up by a prism and you can reveal the components of light. Well, in Persia, white is simply another color. Black is the black of the closed eye, which is the result of standing before the ultimate reality, the moment when you get all of that stuff at once and you go blind. You have to just close because you can't perceive all of it. When you talked about, and there's a lot of things I was going through my mind when you talked about this idea of opening these moments, these windows, when you saw the no play, you were given a frame. And the frame was that particular moment that was scheduled and chosen for that play, and the structure that was created, and the entire scene that was deliberately put there to allow for the bird's shadow to pass in front of the sleeve. So then you realize, in a way, the ultimate frame is human action. And every time we make an action, we change the world. And we literally create something that wasn't there just by simply acting, even in the most simple, mundane way. And so that kind of frame, when you open the video, take the lens cap off and shoot the camera, turn on the camera, all sorts of things happen. And you have to, one of the important things for me, and I was fortunate enough to meet people like Peter Campus, was to realize that they're not mistakes. Because again, you go through art school, you're getting this whole thing with technique constantly, It's like constantly, here's how you do this, and you're young and you don't know how to negotiate the material world. So just as a baby has to learn how to pick up this cup, the little kids go like this, for every time you pick up a cup, there's 100 spills, 1,000 spills behind that you had to go through to be able to just take a drink. And so there's this emphasis when you're growing up on technique, and then you get to art school and you get that, then you're given these great works and you say, well, here's how Cezanne did color, here's how this is how you have to do it. And then you take the video camera out and you're trying to get your shot and the damn bird flies by. So you're cursing the bird. And it takes a while to realize that that was a gift. I have a piece called The Space Between the Teeth, and I had a photograph of a hallway, which you saw at the beginning of the piece as a real image, and
Should we see that piece?
You want to see that piece?
Do you want to see the space between the teeth? Let's see an actual Bill Viola work.
Okay, why not?
We shouldn't say anything before we see it.
Can we put that on?
Is that all right?
It's good. He was taken by surprise, I think. We sort of brought a few tapes in there, and we said we might decide one of a number of these tapes, call it out by title. So he's probably trying to read the titles right now, make sure he's got the right one.
Let's do body, let's do metabolism.
What was it?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, there we go. We have to, can you go back a little, please? Just rescan that back. There you go. It's interactive art. Actually, you can't do that with a Vermeer. That's definitely not possible. And the sound, please. A little louder. A little more. Up. I want to ask you something, and let me just precede it by a few thoughts and have you respond. Well, first of all, the photograph at the end was what I was starting to say. That was completely unplanned. The only idea I had was I knew I was going to have the image fall, and so I knew I needed to make a photograph, but when we got there, I went to this bridge. I had no idea about the boat or anything like that. I was just going to drop it in the water and hopefully it'll get washed away. And we were up there ready. I had 3 photographs, all I could afford to print, and on a piece of sheetrock, and I was ready to let it go, and I heard this noise, and I noticed a boat coming up this little canal, and we dropped it, and that's what it was. But, I mean, talk about gifts, you know. But anyway, so windows of time and time. I wanted to talk about, to ask you about internal time, because what's going on now, as I see it in the 20th century, is really time has been, well, it's been commodified, obviously. Television is an industry that's based on selling time. If you told someone, you know, 150 years ago that one of the largest industries on the planet would be selling time, people's attention spans, they would think you're kind of crazy. But we've been given these tools, these instruments, starting with cinema, which have really not only changed the course of art history by giving images life and movement, but changed culture and society as well. And it has fit very neatly. One of the reasons why it's been so successful is because the same 2 reasons that things are usually always successful on that scale is because they connect with something natural within us. And in this case, it's the desire to stop time, which is an age-old, ancient human desire, to hold reality, to hold time so it doesn't slip away. And the capitalist corporate system, which is a tremendously perfected and advanced system for dealing with material objects in the material world. And so this medium arrives, and all of a sudden we have this time. Now what happens is, of course, you realize that unlike what the clock on the wall tells you, is that which was the first real objectification of time, that unlike what the clock on the wall tells you, is we don't have one time within us. There are many times. And when you begin to work with video, you realize that in fact, is the case. So what I see happening right now is, just like in the 20th century, we have learned that the kinds of things you put in the river are going to show up in your body. We are now also being made aware that these different kinds of times that exist in the world, in fact, are real, and something we can really experience and use. So there's a fundamental change going on about how we think about time and how we use time. And I just wanted you, as someone who works with time, I mean, in a way, I work with time, I work with instruments. You work with people and the living moment. Your performances, your staging of your operas, they're there. What I saw in Salzburg last week was there, and then it's gone, and it's more gone than the gone that's in the Stedelijk Museum right now. Because the gone that's in the Stedelijk Museum has a projector sitting in front of it, waiting to come on again at the push of a button. So could you talk a little bit, Peter, about the time inside us?
Well, I think it's no obviously one of the most difficult parts of being a human being is that we're incredibly at conflict with ourselves. And it's just, we have many selves, and every day, every minute, they're all going at it. And you have to choose which of yourselves is going to win for the moment, or help encourage that one. But the dialogue doesn't stop. And at any moment, every human being is capable of any level of atrocity or any healing act. And no minute is different from any other minute. Both things are equally present at any moment, and they're waiting. And so then, when you have that conflict that's just built into every second of your existence, and some of us have kind of just drowned it in different things, so we don't, like, it just shuts up, but actually it's going on, but you just can't hear it anymore.
Right.
But it's going on. Then, when you feel that you yourself are so conflicted and divided, then the important place where you try and recover your life is the space between. So this video, Bill, is called The Space Between the Teeth. And I'm wondering if you'd talk about the space between, because video, you've used video in the way the Japanese no play is about understanding the space between now and 700 years ago. And yet, what happened 700 years ago is eternally present. And yet, what's happening now is different. So there has to be some space between. And so, this question of the eclipse of distance, that somebody's at the end of the hall and also this close, and that we're actually creating this work about this eclipse of distance, about trying to master this space between in our lives, and this sense of loneliness, distance, isolation, alienation, this sense of closeness, proximity, belonging, and presence that is what we're given to work with. And of course, the most beautiful artistic gestures are the ones that manage to, Jean-Luc Godard's definition of an image, which is to take two realities that are more or less distant. And as an artist, you've created an image when they touch. And that is constantly our task. Because the whole world is telling you, this has nothing to do with that, this is separate from this. And the question is this ecological thinking, where actually these are not separate realities, and where the many selves and the many, this fragmentation How do you move through the fragmentation? How do you move inside it? And how do you get between the teeth? And so inside that scream is this eclipse of distance. But at the same time, a kind of belonging that you have to bridge with more than a video camera. To me, one of the beautiful things in the piece is, you know, Bill made that piece when you were how old?
25.
You know, it's like a, and I love it because it has like student work written all over it. You know, that ridiculous cart that's pulling the camera down the hall, kind of, and then some of it gets in the side of the frame, and then they kind of cheat that out.
That was Danny Restuccio, my friend, who was pulling the cart. We just went and grabbed a cart in the next room.
You know, and, well, but to me it's really satisfying because, again, we're in a period of such high gloss, where something is only acceptable if it has a sort of patina. And of course, this video puts you in the just face-to-face with the fact that there's no high gloss on anything.
Right.
You know, it's just as raw as things are. And so the question is, are you noticing anything? Are you feeling anything? Or maybe you're just not.
Well, ironically, actually, it is glossy in the sense that there... No, I never thought about this. This is interesting because it has that sort of, you know, low-tech kind of thing. But the frame-by-frame editing, when I did that piece in 1976, that was the first year you could do that with video. And I remembered showing that in the video art field and getting some criticism on that piece by the purists, of which actually I myself was one, but I was just so fascinated with new technological possibilities that I just kept going forward. But there was a discussion about, well, that's really a property of film, because all the experimental filmmakers who I really loved and was really influenced by, Michael Snow and Hollis Frampton and people like that, that when structural film hit, it was really Ernie Gare. It was really about this kind of restructuring of space in this montage kind of way, and you could never do that. Editing on the frame with video wasn't considered a video technique before that piece. Before that development, which, of time code editing, which came out in the early 70s. So I did that at Channel 13 in New York at the television laboratory, where they had the state-of-the-art stuff, because in those days, there were no camcorders, and you could only get access to professional stuff, look at art history, right? The guys in the Renaissance, Raphael, Michelangelo, had access to the best technology of the time. Van Eyck was painting the most advanced images on the planet, in the 14th century. That was high definition that he was making. And no one had ever seen an image like that before. And we live in a time now, unlike the Renaissance, when artists were made official members of the court, and they were there right next to the philosophers, the poets, the military leaders. It hasn't happened all the time in history. So they were given access to these resources and stuff, which today, the only people who have access to that are, the commercial filmmakers who are able to deal with the most
And
advanced.
also you use de-accessioned things from the Pentagon, from the U.S. military.
Yeah, I did shoot it. Yeah, first it goes military, then it becomes art. That's sort of the general movement in time here. The oil painting was probably satellite imaging before Van Eyck got hold of it. No, but it is true, this technology does work and travel on strange paths. But, well, I don't know how we got into this, but...
Well, I'd love to get back to the between.
I asked you about time and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
No, the space between. Well, I feel like, telling you this, gosh, with your work, the gap is what makes us human, We are contained in our bodies, And the beautiful thing right now at this moment in this room, what's going on, is there are physical bodies sitting here. All of us are in our own physical containers. We can never, as Pavlov said, the great tragedy of life is one can never truly enter the subjective of another. Well, when he said that, maybe that's true, but I think what's beginning to change now because of things like cinema and video and this moving image world, that the subjective of the other is going out into the world in a really interesting way. But nonetheless, the gap, the physical gap remains. And so the cry of the baby is the cry of separation, and it's the creation of two from one. And from the very beginning of our lives, there is the empty space between us and our desire. And the baby reaches for the ball, I reach for my cup. Things are out there. You never really know something unless you touch it, really think about it. You can see something. Seeing, in a way, is a form of touch, in a way. The light comes in.
In Indian tradition.
Yeah. But there is that emptiness that's between, and that is what gives us the knowledge of who we are, and the need to bridge it. That's why art is created. That's why these words are coming out of our mouths right now. They're sound waves traveling across space, vibrating in people's ears. And in this room with all these physical bodies, one would never say that we're alone because of what's going on in our lives as fully complete human beings, which includes our consciousness, which is moving out over the room. There's a web right now within all of you, most of whom I do not know, going out through your life of connections, experiences, people, that's branching out of this room like some wild vein pattern, going out, way, way out, hundreds of miles. I'm connected back to Long Beach, California, thousands of miles away. It's all present right here in this moment. And it is present through this paradox, which is the ultimate paradox of a human being, which gives energy and life to all religious and philosophical traditions, which is the fact that we have a body and we have a mind and a heart and a spirit, and they are really in two very different worlds, and yet they're part of the same thing. William Blake called the body the soul perceived by the five senses. And when you get the beautiful thing I love about images is the images are that which moves between. There's no space between the teeth there anymore, like we said before, but it's there, it's here. And the images are the thing that, you can go up to a painting, of course, and scrape the pigment off the canvas, but you can, in a way, go up here and touch the light on this surface too, when it's falling on it. So it has, light's a real thing. I can destroy this glass object with sound. You can't see it, yet I can destroy it. I can physically vibrate it till it shatters. So there is a material reality to these things, but it's in that.
Well, let's go with that because again, in the Japanese No tradition, one of the elements that is the pulse, is this pulse that is controlled by the musicians, and in fact the entire performance is controlled by the chief musician, what happens across a no performance is over 2 hours your pulse rate is gradually slowed down to the point where you are on the threshold of consciousness and ready to go into a state of sleep. And this edge of consciousness, this edge of dream, is deliberately induced about 45 minutes into the performance. And the musicians have brought you there carefully by slowing down your heartbeat until, instead of rushing through something, actually your heart begins to function more slowly, which creates a different type of opening of consciousness. Now, a couple of the images that I'd like to just bring up are, in Hindu tradition, the darshan, which is the act of seeing, which is understood as active, as not a
passive reception.
Not a passive reception, but quite the opposite. You can either have the eye of love, of the lover, where you endow what you behold with all the qualities that a lover endows their lover with. That is to say, that person's not the most beautiful person in the world, and yet, for you now, of course they are. and you endow them with this beauty. And it's an act, it's a transformative act, which is the ability to create what you see as you see in the act of seeing. And of course, it also has its reverse, is the evil eye, where to look upon someone is already to curse them, and you've already cursed them in the act of looking. And it's understood that everything is taking place in this possessive act of seeing. And it creates giant moral stakes for simply opening your eyes. And for understanding that looking is not a morally blind operation. It's so charged. And then it's the way you see and what you see when you look and how you look become what you were saying before, the way you change the world. And of course, this then question of the leap of faith of, as an artist, for example, when I go to a rehearsal, what I see is horrifying, but I have to imagine something that's not there yet. And we'll all be patient, and eventually the thing that we see will be there. But that is known as faith. And how you get through life without it, I don't know. Because you really have to say, what we're looking at is not adequate or acceptable. And we have to keep looking in such a way that we can see what is not yet there. Because if we just accept what's there, and that's as far as we can see, we're not going to get anywhere. And so this act of faith that's implicit in the way you look then has to do with when finally the human mind is freed from this grasping, possessive need to write the script all the time. Right. Which is what happens, in this ego loss that's implied in the no play when it slows down and the human will is quieted as you slip into dream, as you're at this state of calm, where you're not trying to control events because you're too tired. And that kind of release from a position of control, and then into a position where you're emotionally opened in a way where the armor falls away and all the things you've protected yourself against, you can no longer defend yourself from. And it arrives, and then you have, the other side of the equation, which is the state of grace, right, where something is offered, where we're blessed, where the motorboat goes by, where a motorboat, which is a stupid thing, becomes, for one moment, awesomely beautiful. Where anything that you would have judged a certain way, you have to now judge differently. You have to understand it has another nature and maybe another purpose in the universe than the one you had always imagined it had. Yeah. And that its presence here is charged with more content.
That's
oh yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, in no theater, the head musician who's controlling the percussion can actually kill someone. I mean, I was just thinking of your image of the sound shattering the glass. Human beings are the same. Is that if the head musician, after slowing down your heartbeat, chooses to bring it up too quickly, people can have heart attacks. And it is, we're very smug about our technology, and we know a whole lot about, how to put people on the moon and how to compute your income tax. But what we're still completely in the dark about is the human heart and what's going on in your heart and why you feel what you feel and how you feel it. And of course, the science of that has occupied a lot of other cultures, of understanding how your heart works and the way it connects to the moral and emotional content of your life. Not just as what's on the scanner, but that pulse is actually a moral pulse. It's a spiritual desire, and it's an attempt of an opening. And the space between those pulses becomes the space in which another self, of course, is present. And so I was at, when I was in college, there was that Harvard psychologist, Robert Rosenthal, who took all those films of babies, mothers and babies,
Right.
and slowed them down and showed you all of these signals that were taking place between a mother and her child that, of course, to the naked eye were invisible. Right. And then given frame-by-frame analysis, you realize there was this complex web of communication going on. So for me, when I left college, there was a show on at the Museum of Modern Art by an artist named Bill Viola, and a piece in it called Passage, which is in the Stedelijk, the 20-minute film of the birthday party. There's a 20-minute film of a 2-year-old's birthday party.
4-year-olds.
4-year-old's birthday party that Bill slowed down to be 7 hours long. And in this space between, and the public goes in through this long, narrow corridor. It's a tube. You're going through this intense tunnel of experience. And Bill set the piece up so that when you walk in the room, one of the things about a video image is you always see the edges of it. You see the edge of the monitor. In this image, Bill has the image cover an entire wall. And when you go to that installation, one of the things you don't know is the floor has been built up and the walls have been created so that you do not see the edge of an image, but in fact the image fills an entire wall without an edge. And it's against a wall. When you go through the tube, you're against a wall that's 5 feet away from the screen. And the screen is so large, it means you can never see the entire screen. You are inside the image, which is a complete reversal of the history of video, where a video image is always something that is containable. And suddenly, the image is larger than you are, and you can't step back from it to get any perspective. You are in it, because the wall prevents you from moving. And we're in this birthday party footage, and you look at these 4-year-olds as the cake comes out, which is, now become a Javanese ceremony that's 2 hours long. In trance.
It's true.
And you look in the eyes of these children, and you see at one moment this little girl on the day she gets married. Later you see her when she's 70 years old. You see her in middle age. You see her when she'll be 10. Is that in that single second of footage, in that single second of human experience, you were living your entire lifetime, all the way through. And it's there. And each of us are living our entire lifetime every second. And that's why the space between is so thick. Is your whole future is already written. And in that piece, which, as I mentioned earlier, it came when I was obsessed with length, and I sat and watched in the Museum of Modern Art for 7 hours. I watched it from the beginning to the end. I just took a day and lived with that piece. It was one of the most overwhelming experiences I've ever had in my life. It was next to spending, going to the Japanese no play at dawn and not leaving till sunset. And of course, I was the only person who did that in Japan. At the end of the day, the performers came off the stage and said, "Who are you?" Nobody watches a whole day.
That's why we hired you for this job,
yeah.
Peter.
And what's interesting to me in a museum installation is people pass through a museum and you can spend a lifetime in front of a Vermeer or 10 seconds. Bill's pieces, you can just walk past as like an acquaintance, or you can spend time with as a friend. And you can begin, they invite this experience of transformation through time. An awareness of the way time is moving through your life, awareness of the way your consciousness is functioning or not functioning, awareness of how generous, tolerant, open you are, or how closed, impatient, and distracted you are. And the great Indian art historian Coomaraswamy, described art as an aid to meditation. It offers you a sanctuary, a moment, an occasion, and subject matter that are worth spending time with and that actually stop the flow of traffic. This mad rush of thoughts that your mind is constantly. And offer you a way to feel what's moving through you in time. Now, well, Bill, hey, you're I've gone on.
Peter was very beautiful.
Could we just talk about?
Can I just tell you just a little story about time from Germany when I set up Stopping Mind? Because in a way, we're talking about time as, if it's one thing, but the piece I did, the stopping mind, really deals with that idea of trying to stop time that we all carry with us. And the beautiful thing about that is you realize you never stop time. So if you think of photography as a frozen moment, it's not a frozen moment. It doesn't capture time. Video cameras don't capture time. Film cameras don't capture time. You don't catch time. Any shaman knows that. What you capture is light and sound, an impression of something that gets contained and held, and you're able to release it again. But you don't stop time. So therefore, you take a photograph of your wedding day, and you keep that photograph with you, and you wait until you're 70 years old, and you pull that photograph out and you show it to your grandkids, and you see your wedding day, and your grandkids see a bunch of people wearing funny clothes and driving funny cars. So something is changing, but it's not the image. It's not the time that was captured. The beautiful thing about it, like the glance, which is an eternal moment, is that time doesn't stop. It keeps going. And so when someone stares out at you from a monitor that was recorded 25 years ago, then they're looking at you now, at that moment. And so there is that paradox between the eternal kind of moment and this temporary feeling of fleetingness that we get all the time, which is the same idea about why we have our bodies that will materially disintegrate at one point, and human life when looked at from the point of view of the individual, which a country like America has a great danger of doing, of looking at everything. I mean, the country founded on individual freedom and all that that has created, the tremendous energy that that has captured and released, also has a danger as we move into the age of individualism as personified by the media, where instead of Henry Ford's, you can have any car of any color as long as it's black, now you get a VCR or a computer and you have a 20-page menu of user options with which you can interface with this thing. So we're moving into this highly individualized world that has a danger of really viewing life through the point of view of the individual, which is the line. And if you view life through the social network, which is the family and your loved ones and your relationships, your friends, then it's not a line, it's a circle. The thing that really saved me when my mother passed away in 1991 was our kids, because they were the way out. That's the way out. And if they weren't around, I would have had such a different, I would have really felt this finality, like it would have been just so difficult and depressing. And so this idea of these times, these moments that are constantly passing through us, like fluids, like air, comes in and out, is something that we're really given right now. When you mentioned no, one thing I thought about was from Zeami's Cadentio. It's the founder of No Theater's text of the instructions to the No actors called the Cadentio, the Way of the Flower, and it's available. You could get it at your local bookstore, direct from the 14th century to you. And he describes that state you talked about as the model he gives his actors is the model of the bird, the seagull, where and all of us have been on boats, I remember as a kid throwing up the food to the seagulls, and they would just sit there like this over the boat, just like this. Because they reached that point of equilibrium and balance where they were in total balance with what was around them, and they're being supported by the air. And look, I was amazed. I thought they were just floating. I couldn't believe this as a kid. It was amazing. I thought I didn't know how they were suspended at all. The story I wanted to tell about time. Woo! Who's he? The timekeeper himself has arrived. Anyway, so one story about time. I set up the stopping mine in Frankfurt. For those of you that haven't seen the show, it's a piece with 4 screens, and the image literally stops, which is something you can do with a VCR. You can't do with your body. But you can stop time, quote, a representation of time. And so the images are frozen in stillness and silence, and then without warning, they move. It would be like as if you're playing your VCR and you hit pause, and then randomly released it and it went into play with huge sound, and the image was chaotic. It's recorded with a wildly moving camera. So you have these intervals which are randomly controlled by a computer program we set up, which I, as the artist who made the work, have no control over. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to do and when it's going to do it. So it just keeps starting and stopping at different intervals. The longest interval we programmed in for it to stop was about 1 minute and 10 seconds. I set it up for the first time. When I set up my pieces, I love to sort of be like an anonymous stranger in the corner. The rooms are dark. I just sit there, and I love to feel people and just see how people experience things. So I was standing in the corner of this piece, and this little old lady comes down. You have to go down a corridor, turn a corner, and when you turn a corner, you come in, you're facing this big image right in front of you. It's one of the 4 screens. And if you go around that screen on either side, they're 16 feet across, about 4.5 meters across. If you go around those screens, then you come into the inner room with the 4, which is where you really experience the piece from. The entry comes right into the back of one of the screens. So she comes down, I see her, I hear this cane, I see the shadow, she walks in the room, and I say, oh, neat. an old woman, because mostly young people coming in at that point. I thought, this is going to be interesting. Let's see how she, takes this piece. So she comes in just at a moment when the image had stopped. And it was a big red smear across the thing. A little bit, the camera had moved across a bright light, and it left this big smear, and it was frozen. So she walked in just at the moment when it was pausing the longest it could ever pause, which it does like maybe 3 times a day. She stops, she looks up, sees the big red line, she looks from one end of it to the other, turns around, walks down the corridor and goes out of the room. And at that moment I watched her go down the hallway, and just as she turned the corner, the image moved, and the whole room exploded. So here's a piece with there's 54,000 frames of video in a half hour, right? That computer can stop that piece at any one of 54,000 pictures. You never know which one it's going to be. So it's this incredibly complex, probably the most complex piece in the show as far as the image source behind it. And this lady saw this one red smear, and if you asked her, what about The Stopping Mine by Bill Viola, what did you think of that? She, oh, you mean the one with the big red line? I like that one very much. But that's fine, that's absolutely fine. She saw the piece. She did.
We're not going to hurt them at all. They're up in the outer levels of the stratosphere. They've been found a kilometer deep below the surface of the Earth. They won't even notice. Well, that is our version of the discussion of the end of life on Earth. We're also into various versions of the discussion of the end of art. We hear once in a while that Jesse Helms is ushering in the end of art by closing down the National Endowment for the Arts. According to Arthur Danto, Warhol's Brillo boxes in the 1960s were the end of art. When television in the 1950s came into being and was going to make theater a thing of the past, that was the end of art. In the 1910s, when Duchamp hung up a urinal in an art show, when Malevich exhibited a white canvas, when Picasso fragmented visual reality, that must have been the end of art. When in the 1840s the camera was invented, of what purpose could art possibly be after that? In 1500, when Michelangelo and Raphael, who have been mentioned with honor this afternoon, created the absolute ultimate in the capturing of visual reality and picturing the deepest values of civilization and religion, what could possibly have happened after that? Well, you can go back to a lot of moments like that. I think the 5th century BC was the end of art. I mean, Bill's opera and theater certainly reached a height, as well as the visual arts, that was never paralleled since then. And yet, there is no end of art. When we listen in, as we are privileged at the John Adams Institute to do 10 or 12 times a year, to the thoughts and discussions of artists and writers and people of culture from America and from the Netherlands, talking about their involvement, as we have this afternoon, with art and the age-old themes of time and spirituality, and with the brand new themes of technology, which Bill Viola is now treating in the biblical way of turning the weapons into swords into plowshares by taking military technology and turning it into video art. All I can say is that we have nothing to worry about in terms of art ever ending. And going into the new millennium, I would say your batteries are charged. Thank you.
Thank you.